Lately, you may have seen more sunscreens being labeled as Reef Safe, or you may have heard about Hawaii banning certain sunscreens because of issues with coral reefs. So what's up with that? So first of all, Reef Safe is not a regulated label, so you can put that on there and it's not actually Reef Safe. So you are going to have to do a little bit of digging by reading the back of the label to see what the ingredients are. While Oxybenzone is great at protecting you from the sun's harmful rays, it's really damaging to our ocean life. With some types of coral larvae, that's their little babies, that oxybenzone acts as a skeletal endocrine disruptor. Basically, it causes them to encase themselves in their own skeleton, which renders them immobile. Corals are seen developing more lesions, being more susceptible to viruses, and coral bleaching is a big problem in areas with higher concentrations of oxybenzone. Coral bleaching is really the most jarring sign of an unhealthy reef system. With a lot of corals, they have these symbiotic relations with these tiny little algae cells called zooxanthellae. So these little guys settle into the tissues of the coral polyps, like thousands and thousands of them. And this is what gives corals their really bright colors. And they settle in there and they're photosynthetic, so they provide the coral with oxygen and a bunch of nutrients that polyp needs to grow. And you know how they say you get gray hairs when you're stressed out, like, oh, this one's from my 5-year-old falling off his bike, and this one's from my 2-year-old potty training. Well, the same is true for corals. If they get stressed out, either due to a toxin in the environment, like a chemical, or if the ocean is getting too warm, which is happening also, what they'll do is they'll push those zooxanthellae out when they're stressed, and then they kind of just become this like blank, white, dead piece of coral. If those zooxanthellae don't return to that coral, then that coral just eventually dies off. And what that means overall is that coral doesn't build on itself and grow. So who cares? Well, about 500 million people do that rely on coral reefs as coastal protection, income, food, and as a tourist attraction. Also, about 1/4 of marine life who use those coral reefs for shelter, spawning, and feeding. Here's a list, and I'll put them down in the description below too, so you can have longer to look at them as you compare your sunscreens. But there's a list of what other ingredients are harmful to coral reefs. And you really do have to do a little bit of sleuthing and digging yourself to find out what's in your sunscreen. Some chemicals go by more than one name, or it's labeled Reef Safe, so you assume that actually is Reef Safe. Before we went on our trip to the Great Barrier Reef a few years ago to go diving, I stopped in at our local dive shop just to see if there was anything new in. And I picked up the 3 sunscreens that they were selling in our shop, and they were clearly labeled Reef Safe, all of them. So I asked the guy that was working there, who was actually my dive instructor, I was like, hey, isn't this ingredient not Reef Safe? And he's like, well, I'm not a chemist, I'm a dive instructor. But to me, that's your livelihood. Even being in Minnesota, you still want to care about the reefs that you're visiting all around the world, that you're bringing people to. You need to protect those reefs even if they aren't here. So what if you aren't near the ocean? Do you still need to use Reef Safe sunscreen? Even if you're nowhere near the ocean, it still seems best practice to use Reef Safe sunscreen. There's been some studies about estrogenic effects on fish in freshwater lakes and streams. That's like the hormone changes in the fish. And there's growing concern about how some of those chemicals affect low levels of the food chain. So the things that all our fish that we eat are eating. And those nanoparticles that we talked about earlier, so those can be physically harmful to those coral polyps in the ocean. And as far as freshwater systems go, they can actually damage the cell walls of the good microbes that we use to treat our wastewater. And I don't know about you, but I want my wastewater treated properly. As far as sunscreens packaging goes for waste, this is one area where I'm a lot more relaxed in because I do want people to wear sunscreen to protect themselves from skin cancer, right? But if you have a smaller container, it's a lot easier to like stick that in your purse or your diaper bag or your backpack so that you have that more accessible so that you'll actually use it. So the convenience of that is gonna outweigh the fact that you would use less packaging overall. Also, sunscreen does have an expiration date. So if you have a few bottles of sunscreen from previous summers, if it's been more than a few years, you should probably toss that out because it won't be as effective. And the same thing if you leave a sunscreen in a hot car over the summer too. Unless you're in charge of providing the sunscreen for like your kid's entire soccer team, you don't want to buy the industrial size bottles of sunscreen if you're not going to use it. If you're going on vacation and you're not checking a bag, you're only bringing a carry-on, as of right now, TSA does count sunscreen as a liquid, so it has to be under that 3.4 ounces. So those smaller bottles come in handy for that too. You could also buy those reusable bottles that meet TSA requirements, that you put like your conditioner, your sunscreen, or your shampoo in there. Or you could reuse the shampoo or conditioner, tiny little bottles that they give you at the hotel. You could reuse those for your sunscreen. Overall, if you're doing a really good job at avoiding the sun in peak hours or putting on SPF protective clothing, you're gonna have less waste because you're not using as much sunscreen. So in the grand scheme of things, that's gonna be the best way to reduce waste with your sunscreen. That is everything that I have learned about sunscreen and its effects on you and the environment, and also what you're looking for in a sunscreen. My next video is going to be my reviews of all the different sunscreens that I've tried over the last few years. The ones that I like, the ones I don't like, and why. And also we'll dig into a little bit about the companies that produce those specific sunscreens. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend who might have some questions about sunscreen, and if you're not already subscribed to A Greener Demeanor, go ahead and click the subscribe button down below and the little bell so you can get updates on the videos that I put out. Thanks for watching.